Hello and welcome to the kitchen table. It's Alison Soughton here from the Melksham Team Ministry. Welcome. It's good to gather again this Wednesday afternoon. Today is March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. I just wondered what that meant for you. Is it a day where you feel any connections that you have with Ireland are drawn tighter together and you suddenly become Irish? Is it a day where you wear green, where you go out and have a nice glass of Guinness, pubs opened allowing, which I guess now is a difficulty this year? St. Patrick's Day is the day that Irish people everywhere celebrate everything that is Irish. But you know, St. Patrick was actually quite an interesting character. And nowadays, his character is even more important, I think, for people like me, people who are ministers and thinking about how we share the gospel message. Patrick was born in the north of England in the 5th century, and he was born and raised in a Romanicized, if that's a word, family, and they were Christians. But they were Christians as a family, and it wasn't really anything that was personal to him. Well, life sort of toddled on as through his childhood, and then he got to 16 and he was abducted in a raid and he was taken back into slavery in Ireland. That must have been such an event. And he was there for several years, 6 years, I believe. And during that time, rather than being completely alienated and separating himself, he really got to know the Irish people, the people he was living with. He got to know their character. He heard their stories. He got to know them really well. And then when he found his own freedoms, he went back to England. But it was while he was in slavery that he had a real moment of knowing God. It wasn't so much a conversion, he'd been baptized, he knew the story. But in that time, it became his story. It became real to him, his relationship with God. And when he went back, he trained as a priest and he lived out a lot of his life in ministry in the north of England. And it wasn't until he was quite old, I say this knowing that age is something that changes as we go through the generations, but at 48 he would have actually been considered quite old in the 5th century. And when he reached 48, he had a vision, he had a voice speaking to him, an Irish voice calling him to come back and to spread the good news. Now, he could have just put his feet up and retired at that age. That would have been quite reasonable. But he heard this call and he went back to Ireland. And he didn't go back with an expectation of just setting out the gospel, making everyone understand, making it their story told to the Irish people. It didn't occur to him to do that. He knew the character of the Celts, of the Irish people. He knew that they loved storytelling. He knew that for them, grand tales were really important. He also knew that creation was important to them. It was a pagan country, and many people thought it was lawless, barbaric, and beyond the pale, not somewhere you could take the gospel message. But for Patrick, there was a connection. And he took friends with him, people that believed in God, and they would go as a group of people and they would move into an area where a tribe lived. And they would get to know the locals. They would share their stories, the grand tales of the Bible, and there are really grand tales in the Bible. And he would listen to what was important to them. The number 3 was really important to them. So using their own folklore, he described the Trinity to them, talked about God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. And he would stay and eat and share stories, get to know his people, and they would get to know him. And then they would get to know God. When I was first called into ministry, I was called with a real sense of kitchen table stuff, getting to know people by sharing food with them, by hearing their stories. And I think that's exactly what Patrick did, and it's exactly what they now describe as pioneer ministry. It's about getting to know people and them getting to know you. And maybe as you become friends, that's where faith flourishes. In fact, St Andrew's Church, we always say, find yourself, find friends, find faith. That's kind of how it works. If you've been listening to some of my kitchen table talks, if you've been getting more curious about this Christian faith, then do get in touch with me, and when we are open we will have a conversation, hopefully around a meal where we can get to know each other and share, tell each other the stories of our lives, if you like, because it's when we do that that we truly open up our hearts and God does the most amazing things. So today, when we think about St Patrick and all that he did, the lives that he changed, the faith that he had, I think it's important for us to think about what it's like in our world as we draw into this next phase of our world. A world where people are sometimes a bit anxious or curious, but not committed to any one particular thing. It's a world where we still like to hear a story. It's a world where we still like to make connections. And more, I think it's a world in which we need to listen to one another and really hear. So we've got much to learn from St Patrick and his crew that he would take with him. Spending time as communities, putting our lives back together, talking to each other about what is going to be important as we move forward from this pandemic. Some of the best parts of what we've learned about ourselves and about our towns or our cities. And how we're able to also recognise some of the things that haven't been so good. The things that separate and divide, the way we use technology, the way we connect with one another, has been brilliant in some ways, divisive in others. It's a time for us to think about rebuilding our land. And I think that model of Patrick, of sitting around a fire, sharing food, hearing stories, and moving a community into a better place, is a great way of doing it. As we begin to do those things, it's going to need all of us, the old, the young, everyone in between, to think about what's going to help us to flourish, to grasp hold of those things of hope, and to be bold and brave as we rebuild our communities. For me, knowing that I have Jesus with me as I do that is my great comfort, and it's my great joy. If that's not something that you have in your life, then that's fine too. But it's about you and I talking together, each other, sharing, growing stronger. So happy St Patrick's Day. And think about what it means to listen to another story, to share food together, and to build a better tomorrow. I'll see you on Sunday morning from the kitchen table. If you fancy a chat, give me a call, send me a text or an email. It'd be great to hear from you. God bless.